Welcome to the Extra Yard with the AFCA. On this podcast, we'll take you beyond the X's and O's to discuss current topics within the game, talk with key figures shaping the game's future, and give you the resources to best support your staff and players. Our goal is to bring you insights and perspectives that go the extra yard. We'll tackle the latest developments, share innovative ideas, and give advice to help you stay ahead in your coaching career. Whether you're a coaching vet or just starting out, join us as we explore the stories and strategies that drive success on and off the field. Now let's get into it. Planning and preparation are huge components to being a great coach and running a great program. Game planning, for instance, throughout the course of a week, you prepare your players for every situation, good or bad. The defense being prepared to take the field after the offense turns the ball over, teaching the offensive player how to tackle after an interception or a fumble, fire call for a mishandled snap from the holder. You're always prepared, but are you prepared for off the field? What's your game plan if one of your players tells you they want to hurt themselves or someone else? Are you prepared to notice the warning signs that one of your student athletes are struggling with mental health? For middle school and high school age youth, that's 12 to 18 years old, suicide is the second leading cause of death. For college age youth, 18 through 22, suicide is the third leading cause of death, according to the CDC. With May being Mental Health Awareness Month, I wanted to ask, how can we better prepare ourselves to see the signs? How can we better prepare ourselves to avoid tragedy? And how can we better prepare ourselves to take care of our own mental health as coaches? Today, I'm joined with Clark Flatt of the Jason Foundation to have a real conversation about tragedy and how we can be proactive in avoiding it. I also sit down with Dr. Arterburn, who serves as Baylor's Director of Athletic Mental Health Services, where we discuss strategies that Baylor football uses to better support their players' mental health. Today, we're talking with the Jason Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to preventing youth suicide through educational programs and resources. We got Clark Flatt, who founded this in 1997, with us today. Clark, how are we doing?
We're doing fine. I apologize for my casual dress today too, but it's I'm being casual Friday on it. But I appreciate you guys inviting me to share for a few minutes with the membership of the AFCA.
Absolutely, and if any of our coaches are tuning into this that have been to the convention, you're a very familiar face. You kind of worked with us for a very long time prior to me even being here. But everybody might not have had the opportunity to kind of sit in maybe some of those general sessions where you kind of tell your story, and it's always a tearjerker a little bit, but I think it does resonate with our listeners dealing with high school athletes, collegiate athletes, these young men. So if you don't mind, would you mind kind of sharing your story and what motivated you to start this?
Yeah, the elevator version of this is big things. Yeah, I was like a lot of young men and women that are out there, and that was in 1997. I owned an insurance company, a small one. I had the two boys, a dog, a cat, a great family, a wife, overlooking a lake. I loved sports cars back then, and I could afford them back then. Life was great, and that was till July the 16th, 1997. That's a day after receiving a phone call from one of my son's friends of concerned that Jason might be having a hard day. I went looking for him, and long story short, finally went home, and I went in and I heard his music playing, thought that he was down there on his bed listening to his music. Maybe it was upset like his friend had told me, so I went down and I was going to surprise him. As I turned into his doorway, I stumbled and fell on top of my son's body. He had taken my .38 caliber pistol that I had locked up until he was 14. He was 16 then. And written two notes and stood in front of his bed thinking he'd fall straight back. But the force of the .38 coming out of the other side of his head was so great it spun him around and he had fallen across the threshold door. I still remember that day, even though it's almost 27 years now.
Yeah.
Of being there with him and picking his head up and put it in my lap. I wish I could have said I got up at that moment and said, we're going to start the Jason Foundation and confront this terrible thing called youth suicide. But if it hadn't been for a good friend, actually he was the head of the United Methodist Church, a bishop who was a friend of mine, kept calling me and telling me to find something good out of Jason's death. I didn't like that. I'll be honest with you. I didn't care to hear that. That was nothing good that I figured could come from this. But long story, as I finally went on the laptop and typed in "youth suicide," the first thing I saw on my old Radio Shack computer, which you're way too young to remember, it came up from the CDC. Youth suicide at that day and time was the third leading cause of death for young people.
Yep.
We started the Jason Foundation then because as a parent, I'd gone to PTOs, PTAs, church meetings, but drugs, alcohol, even a form of bullying. No one had talked about youth suicide. So that's when the Jason Foundation started, and we're so happy to be where we are today.
Well, that one, I mean, I've heard this a lot of times, working at the AFCA, and it still gives me goosebumps, and I can't even imagine. And I can understand, immediately after a tragedy like that, to find something good out of this. Probably did take some time, but we're happy you stumbled upon it, because what you're doing is impactful. Just real quick, just kind of hit on the foundation's mission. What you got it started, and I'm sure you're learning about this because this was not something you were thinking about prior to this incident.
No, we got it started not to be what we are today. We really was just going to do parent seminars around Tennessee and educate parents about the danger, and not just the danger, but what resources. But we grew very rapidly. 2001, we started working with clinical associates. But our real break came in 2004. We did two things. We formed an alliance with the National Attorney Generals, which using attorney generals in different states to open doors and get meetings for us. But also the AFCA came on board. Coach Philip Fulmer was president of the AFCA at that time, and he was working with us. We got there, had a meeting, and they embraced us, and we started using coaches as ambassadors. That really started our growth. And today, those two things are still very important into our operations. Our programs now have very much broadened. We still have that parent seminar. A lot of churches, a lot of schools give that. That's really focused toward adults of learning about the problems. Right now in ages 10 to 14, suicide is the second leading cause of death. When we go from 12 to 24, it's back up to third. It was second just till this year. So, we still have that huge problem. So we broadened out. We have programs for student curriculums, probably one of the most usually allowed, but that's for middle and high school students. Our number one program is professional development and in-service training for teachers, usually middle school and high school, but it's good for anybody who works with youth.
Absolutely.
Anybody who works with youth. We train about a little over 200,000 average per year on that. So then our coaches program, what you're talking about, we have our coaches assistance program. We have a lot of coaches are using this to help train their own staff, not to be counselors, but to be able to better recognize when one of their student athletes might be struggling with thoughts of suicide, or what to do should one of them come up to. Think about this: you're a coach, you're thinking X and O's, and all this player comes up to you and say, "Coach, can I talk to you a minute? I have some thoughts that I'm scared to death out of. I've thought about hurting myself. What do you do when that happens? And that's unique. Some places say a large college has usually a pretty good mental health system within the college. But think about this. We've helped, I can't use our name, we've helped a lot of head coaches when they have a very high profile athlete who's struggling with some mental health issues. You can't go down to your school's university mental health, because then it gets broadcast. Who works there? The students. And it gets all over the place, and you've only added to that anxiety, depression.
Absolutely.
So we've helped coaches find resources outside that will keep things from escalating. But right now, and there's some great articles out about now, we used to be thinking that a student athlete, especially at the college level, had an insulation factor. That team effort really gave them a lower risk of suicide. But in the last 2 years, a lot of reports have just come out that shows, yes, that is a positive. That team is a positive factor. However, the pressure upon a student athlete today to perform is greater than ever. And therefore, we're seeing the suicide ideation, the thought of suicide and suicide attempts actually escalate now within the student athletes.
Yeah, I mean, that's like you said, that team aspect, you always felt so positive about that.
Right.
But yeah, it's been I want to say around 2020 where you've kind of seen this really big increase in these types of situations, maybe around the COVID break and all that kind of stuff. But you said something extremely important right there, and it's kind of the we're talking to coaches, and we'd love for all of our coaches to have big time jobs and big time staffs and have hundreds of support people. But the reality of it is, majority of our association is going to be high school coaches. Majority of our association is going to be Division III, NAIs, a lot of these guys where sometimes those campuses don't have these resources. So right now, I'm a coach, and I get that statement that you just mentioned. A player walks in my office and says, "Hey, I'm having these types of thoughts." As far as you guys are concerned, just being able to go and identify some resources and education. What should they do to be able to connect with Jason Foundation or the website?
Well, certainly you can go to our website, jasonfoundation.com, and look at all of our resources. A lot of resources, a lot of educational things. Our coaches assistance program, our CAP program is on there too, which is specifically about the student athlete. But there's a contact us there. Of course, they can contact me at any time, Clark Flatt at jasonfoundation.com. We do not do clinical services ourselves, but we have connection and resources that can help you in the community, and be glad to help them on a confidential basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, and probably the bigger thing is you definitely don't, ideally you don't want to be making these clicks and calls as it's happening, being preventative and proactive as possible. So these same resources exist in this place that allows for coaches to be developed and prepared, right?
Yeah, that's one of our biggest problems, people waiting to the crisis.
Right.
Think of it in coach's way. You don't get down and say, what are we going to do when it's fourth down and a yard and it's the fourth quarter? You've got that already thought out. We know what we're going to do if we get in that situation. Same way with mental health. And more important, as you said, more important today than ever, our student athletes, we have seen it ramped up. You're right. Probably we're going into our 5th year of seeing that ramping up within the student athlete. And I'm afraid that such things as the portal and NIL things are going to even increase that uncertainty, that future. So it's important for your coaches. We'll be able to help them too if they want to. They say, listen, I want to do something to help my staff. What can I do? Not to make them counselors, but to have them better prepared to either react to someone coming to them or be proactive. We have trainers. We work with NOCAD a lot on the high school level. But to get the trainer, think about a kid who's been told you're not going to play the rest of the year, and he's the starter.
Yeah,
you've got to be careful there. That the chance for depression is just ramps up something fierce. Be mindful. Teach your staff to say, here's some people we need to watch and be ready to intervene.
Yeah. That kind of reminds me of a time as a player. I pulled my hamstring pretty bad, really significant, and it was like the quietest part of my life I ever really remember. I wasn't in a dark place or anything like that, but I just remember feeling so isolated because I wasn't with my brothers a lot of time. I'm maybe doing treatment or, I'm not a part of the lifting program at this point in time. And, I always remember that as a coach, and I always definitely made sure I checked on those guys. But I know everybody may not have had their personal experience, so it doesn't, resonate with them to check. But I love that. I love you saying that and mentioning that, because everybody's kind of dealing with their own thing, and it's easy to be so caught up in the W's and L's, especially at the collegiate and professional level where so much is hinging upon job security. But checking, just checking on your guys, it's huge.
Right, checking on and being observant. Like you said, if there's an injury, be very observant. Watch that person. Try to include them. What you just said is fantastic on a proactive. Say, let's invite this person back to be on our side. Let's have him involved in
some kind of way.
In some kind of way.
Kind of way. That's right.
So important.
Well, Clark, this has been awesome, man. I do want to ask you this question. And I'm kind of getting goosebumps as I'm preparing to ask it. You mentioned how much you just hated that statement. I believe you said your bishop said that find something positive out of this. And you look, almost 30 years now that this is.
It'd be 27 years.
27 years, yeah. So you're approaching 30 years of just. Man, I've been so impactful across the globe, especially in our coaching community. What do you say to that? When you look back on it, it was definitely a tragedy that sparked this, but, kind of reflecting on these 27 years and the impact, what do you think?
Well, if I could change that one day,
Yeah,
I would have
absolutely.
changed it.
Yeah,
I would
absolutely.
do it. It
Yeah,
would never happen. We wouldn't be talking today.
no
I'm
doubt.
that selfish, that way. But it did happen. So what I can do is decide how to react to that.
Yes, sir.
And I could have fallen apart. I could have went to the bottle. I could have just checked out. And it was sad. I know parents that's happened to. That
Absolutely.
they lost a son or daughter and they just check out. And that adds another tragedy. I've always told people, if there's ever tears in heavens, it's when one of our loved ones if you take your own life, if there's a suicide involved, that person was mentally ill at that time. They were not, just like a cancer. They didn't knowingly do that. That was something that if you know that you lost them that way and then you're going to try to do something positive, I still go by the motto that I did from day one. If we say one life, it's all worth it. I use that line a lot when I'm sitting and talking to people. I'm trying to get them involved to help us, whether it's being an ambassador,
Right.
like our AFCA coaches. I would say, if your involvement can save one life, how important is your involvement with us? And then before they tell me, I ask them, if that one life is your son or daughter, your grandson or granddaughter, how valuable was it? And once you bring it in and you say, this is something I need to do for myself and I need to do for others, that's when it changes. So if we've changed one, and we know we have, we get emails and calls and things, but still, one life is worth it all. That some parent, and if you're a coach, some student athlete, their family hadn't had to experience this, because 4 out of 5 will demonstrate warning signs before they attempt. We know what to look for and how to respond. You got a chance to save a life, and that's pretty cool.
That is, and I'm sure you saved more than one for sure. I mean, countless, and so we appreciate you. Thank you so much. We're super proud of our affiliation association.
Well, we're proud to be part of you guys.
Yeah,
thank you, sir.
Well, we'll make sure to link that link in the show notes and any type of contact information to help prepare our coaches to be on the lookout and be preventative in this. Okay.
Yep, and just call us from down there if you ever need us, or you know somebody who needs us.
We will do that. Thanks, Clark. Today we're here with Dr. Don Arterburn, who has worked for Baylor since 2011. Dr. A has served as the Student Outreach Coordinator for 5 years and for the last 11 years as the Addiction Recovery Specialist in the Counseling Center. He joined athletics as the Director of Athletic Mental Health Services in January of 2022. Dr. A, happy to have you. How you doing?
I'm great. Glad to be here.
Well, thanks for taking the long walk over here. Pretty cool. Just being right across the street from you guys, especially being a former Baylor alum. I love having you guys walk over and especially assist us with bringing some great knowledge to the podcast. So thanks.
You bet.
Well, let's kind of dive right on into this thing. We're really focusing on mental health services, Mental Health Awareness Month. Obviously it's nice when you can put some awareness on it, but obviously this is something that's year round, all the time, ongoing, especially when you start dealing with this age range of students and student athletes. What sparked your interest to join the athletic side of this of mental health back in 22?
So I was working with the athletics already, and we're having a hard time getting the athletes to come over to the counseling center, just across the street, but still kind of on the main campus. And so I would go over a day or two a week and meet with athletes, in their own facilities. And so that was working pretty good, but it helped to facilitate where they could get right out of a team meeting and come meet with me, or I could come to their team meetings and do some education and things like that. So it was just better to be housed in that, in that environment. And my background is, in athletics, and my family, my dad was a college coach and my brother a high school football coach. And so have had an interest, and enjoyed athletics. And so it was a great fit for me to be able to do the mental health side in a context of athletics.
Well, it's interesting. You said initially it was kind of hard for them to walk across the street, and now that you're probably more available and more around and things like that, what are you noticing in terms of these guys been willing to come in and maybe share some of their issues? Is it increasing, or what are you noticing just in general with mental health and athletics?
I think since COVID, a couple things that we've noticed in the mental health arena is that the intensity level of mental health issues has gone up. And so people, when isolated during COVID, really struggled with the connection that they need to be able to kind of be okay and work through things. And so that loneliness or that isolation really kind of brought more people to the need where they said, well, I have to work through the stigma of going to counseling or getting help, asking for help because the need is greater. And so where a teammate might be trying to be helpful in helping somebody's athletic career, now they're looking out for each other, with their mental and emotional health too. And so I think the stigma has lowered some because people are more aware of resources for it, but the intensity has gone up. And so they might come in with 5 years ago or 6 years ago, might come in with issues like anxiety and depression. And now there's more heightened issues with those two things, relationships, and even some suicidal ideation and trying to find purpose in life and things like that. So the intensity of the issues are higher, but the resources, we've tried to keep up with them and try to increase those as we're going. I think even the NCAA recognizes because of some tragic events, some suicides among some athletes, that we have to address the issues and get ahead of it instead of just being reactive.
Absolutely. We had a very interesting conversation, prior to the podcast. I asked you the question, what is something that every coach needs to take away from this podcast? If they sit here and listen, what's the one thing that you want them to know? And your response was, what do you do in a crisis? And especially in my younger years, I definitely couldn't answer that question. And I would reckon there's a lot of guys, not just in younger years, there's a lot of guys in the profession that know how to get a first down, maybe know how to cross the pylon, but don't necessarily know what to do when the game of life strikes and there's a crisis in that manner. I'm just going to open the floor up to you and just let you kind of just educate us on what we should know about what to do in a crisis at, bare bone minimum.
Right. We just want to have a plan in place for emergencies or crises so that we know kind of what to go to and who to call in that situation, because it's the intensity is high and our anxiety goes up, and we want to be as helpful as we can be. And so having an emergency or crisis plan is good. And what that mostly involves is how to evaluate what the person's at, and are they at harm to themselves or somebody else. And so there's a few good questions to ask, and we kind of have to there's good trainings you can go to, and it might be a good idea to plan a training for your staff, once a year, just to say, if this comes up and we have somebody who's talking about wanting to kill themselves or hurt themselves or somebody else, what would we do in that situation?
Right.
Like, who would we call? And there's just kind of common sense stuff about getting emergency services, involved. And so you think about calling 911 and trying to get, somebody helpful there if there was a medical emergency. So it's very similar in a mental health crisis. We want to be able to know kind of who to call and how to evaluate it. So asking somebody, maybe like a question of like 1 to 10, like, you seem to be very upset. Some people have some concerns about you. You've said some things that were kind of scary to teammates or other coaches. Tell us what's really going on and kind of where you're at. And you have to kind of ask the awkward question. You feel like you're at a place where you might hurt yourself or somebody else. So like on a scale of 1 to 10, how big a crisis is this for you?
Yeah.
And so if the person's saying, 5 or under, then their anxiety is elevated and they're struggling, but it's probably not a crisis. If it's above, 6 to 10, then we want to be careful kind of how we talk through that and what resources we get them to. It's good to know kind of where where you can send them for further evaluation. So we usually would have them transported to the hospital, and most emergency rooms have, somebody there that can evaluate them further for their suicidal thoughts or plans.
Yeah.
And if somebody, has a plan and has a method, like I'm thinking about, driving my car into a bridge, later tonight. How many times have you thought about this? Where are you in terms of carrying this out? What's your, where are you at 1 to 10? And if they have a high motivation, then we want to stay with that person and make sure we get them evaluated by somebody else. So usually that involves, a hospital,
Right.
Emergency room type situation. Now, if you have some mental health professionals on your staff, if you're lucky enough to have that, then you can say, okay, so they would call me and say, well, Dr. A is going to be here in a few minutes and talk to you about how you're doing. And the coaches and the trainers and the other people, staff involved, is to, responsibility to stay with that person and just monitor how they're doing and try to help kind of make it a safe environment for them to be working through their crisis.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. Now, you may mention, Baylor can call you when you start looking at probably a large part of our association who work at smaller schools or maybe work at a place that's not going to be fortunate enough to have a guy like you when you're kind of more in that proactive stage where you're walking over almost, at least weekly to give some type of education, to give some type of support. Where would you recommend, a staff maybe getting some education for themselves or, being a little bit more on a proactive side? Where would you recommend they go at maybe a lower level where they don't have the same resources?
Right. So probably in every situation, the key person is really going to be the trainer.
Okay.
And so, and trainers get a good bit of education, but you'd probably want to talk to them and your other coaches about, let's take this serious and get the training and get a plan in place. The trainer is usually the one, at least on the campuses that I work with, that they're the first to know.
Yeah.
And so, again, proactively, if they can kind of, like we have a care team, and we talk about the athletes on each team that are injured or who have had a death in the family or who are struggling academically. And so we're trying to kind of get ahead of it and build a relationship with them, reach out to them ahead of time. And so for the trainer and for the other coaches, it'd be good to have some, there's like mental health first aid is a course that you can take.
Okay.
There's like mental health 101 or other courses, other things online, or you can have trainers come in and talk to your staff and have some people that have some experience. So we do some of that training for other staffs and things like that. And there are people around that would love to come in and help people develop an emergency plan or get ready. Just, I think that like from the NCAA's perspective, they want to see what are you doing with your athletes at whatever level to collaborate with the people around you and come up with a plan to take it serious and to offer as many resources as you can. And so I think it, depends upon what you have to work with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So who are the people around that you want in on the discussion? Sometimes people in student life or even academic care, let's pull them in and let's collaborate. And I think one of the things that happened many years ago was they had some, shootings on campuses across the country, and they looked and they found out that the professor knew that the student was struggling, the roommate knew, the parents knew, the coach knew, and so how do we get those people together to talk about people that they're concerned about?
Yeah.
So like we're very fortunate at Baylor. We have a care team that any coach or parent or student can say, hey, I've got a concern about this student and you haven't been coming to class, struggling with this. They had a death in the family, whatever. And so just trying to work in a network and collaborate with other people to kind of keep an eye on people that are struggling is a way to get ahead of it.
Absolutely.
Not just have to be reactive.
Yeah. Well, you said, you were talking there and you mentioned like somewhat of examples of like, hey, this student mom just passed or, is not doing very well academically. What other kind of red flags are do you see or you guys track? I mean, I know relationships when I was a coach was definitely something my kid would be dropping passes as a receiver. And I'm like, man, what is going on? Oh, me and my girlfriend broke up. We've been together 5 years. You know, what are those other red flags that you see that you kind of say, okay, hey, we need to keep an eye on this situation?
So one of the things I appreciate about Coach Aranda is he really cares about the person and the player.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things he says is that the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. And so looking at even struggling on the field or on the court gives you a chance to look and see how's this guy doing academically?
Yeah.
How's he doing in his relationships? What's going on with his family? So what's his nutrition like? How many hours of sleep is he getting a night?
Yeah.
Right. Is he handling his stress well? So like I'll ask the athletes that I'm working with, so what's your best stress management trick? What do you do? What helps you to calm down? And in a college setting, alcohol and THC are used quite often as, pain management and de-stressors. And so you have to be careful with that. So that's another thing to really track is are you using medication to be able to try to calm down, to manage your pain, to sleep, to create an appetite? Because if you come dependent upon those things, then you get real trapped into that I'm not okay if the thing that's making me okay is not available.
Yeah. Well, what's kind of is becoming interesting as we talk more about this is that if Dr. A just walked in here to Mario Price right now and I don't really know you and you say, hey, how do you relieve stress? I don't know if I'll be very honest, just being real.
Right.
So it seems like just building some of that rapport and relationships with these young people seem to be a very, very important part of, at the very least, your role, but definitely those coaches' roles for sure, right?
Right. And a lot of people will say their initial answer is something like, take a nap, I play the game, I get something to eat, I call my girl, I call a friend, I do something like that.
Yeah.
And then, so the follow-up question, once you build the rapport, is, are you doing anything to manage your stress that you think might be unhealthy or causing a problem?
Yeah.
Or are you struggling with things? So if my way of coping with stress and my mental health issues hurts my finances, my relationships, my academics, or my health, then that's where I'm going to start having enough pain or trouble that I actually want some help with it.
Yeah.
And sometimes it has to be more than one or all four.
Right.
For somebody to say, yeah, my life's not on target right now. I need some help getting it back on track. And like, okay, what's going on? Well, I'm struggling in my relationships, not doing well in school, not getting any sleep, and spending all my money on, partying so that I can deal with all the stress. So there's, sometimes that's kind of the typical kind of headed the wrong direction, hitting bottom, ready for a change type motivation.
There you go.
And so, but we want to, although that's really motivational and sometimes what it takes, we want to offer people some off ramps, to that path as often as we can.
Amen. Well, man, this is super enlightening. I do want to ask you this before I let you go here. Obviously our organization is, geared towards tooling coaches to be as prepared as possible to serve their young people. And, you've got a family of coaches, so you kind of know the preparation that just goes in week to week for each opponent for how you attack off season. There's always a very structured plan. And you mentioned the term proactive a couple of times here today. How do you tool the coaches to be proactive? I kind of know the answer because of our previous conversation, but how do you make sure that they're prepared for the issues that they might see throughout the course of the year? Personally here at Baylor, how do you do it?
Right. So I try to build some good rapport with them too. Right. Yeah. And know that the athletes are going to be in and out. And even with the transfer portal, going to maybe be here for a year or two, instead of 4. And hopefully the coaches are here a lot longer. So I'm trying to build some good rapport with them and help them to know both for their own personal mental health, but also how to encourage that with their athletes. So we do some trainings. We have a summer series where we try to do like once a month. We have a training for coaches and staff, and we usually cover topics like the mental health 101 or what to do in a crisis, how to help somebody with suicidal thoughts, something on eating disorders, something on substance misuse or dependency, We've done things on trauma before, on eating disorders, on other topics like that. So we give updates on kind of mental health mandates from the NCAA, and try to do some things on mindfulness and meditation or stress management. So some kind of personal self-care type things for coaches.
Right.
So if you don't have those type of things offered to you at your school, then just know that there's more resources than ever online. And so I will Google just, athletic mental health or athletes and stress or coaches mental health, right? And there's TED Talks and there's different series and podcasts that you can listen to, and people that there's sports psychology offers a lot these days that it never has before. So there's a lot of more people online trying to offer some good encouragement and training to help coaches take care of their own mental health.
Yeah.
And then also to know what to do and how to help their athletes get the most out of the mental side of their game, which is kind of the sports psychology part, and then also take care of their mental health and well-being, overall wellness, just as a developing the person side of it.
Absolutely. Well, I'm happy you said it, because I think I might have went this podcast without really mentioning the coach's mental health. It's just not something I really was prepared to talk about preparation for the students, but with the game being more competitive than it's ever been, you got the transfer portal, you got coaches making more money than they've ever made in the profession. It's a lot more pressure to win than it's ever been. And we're probably the only industry, I think, where we've gotten more technology, and somehow that's led us to create more work rather than the opposite, right? And so now all of a sudden you got a lot of sleep deprived coaches working under stress. Obviously the time away sometimes can put a strain on marriage and relationships with your kids and stuff like that. So, obviously you don't have to use particular details or anything like that, but how stressful are you seeing the coaches, man? How much mental pressure are you seeing from the coaches, just in your dealings over the years?
Well, I know that a mentally secure person reports having significant relationships of trust in their life. And when you're moving around and doing really hard work, and then you shift and go to a new place 5 years later, and then 2 years later you go to another place, and so it's a transient type of profession sometimes, because you're trying to do a great job here so that you can do a great job somewhere else and kind of move up, get even better jobs, more opportunities. And so building those relationships are really important. But something happens in the coaching career where it's like, how much do I want to build this relationship with the people around me if I'm only going to be here 3 to 5 years?
Yeah.
And so that's a real key component, is having some long-term connection with other people, whether they're in the same town as you or not. And so it's like, I'll ask coaches, who do you turn to for support? And they'll say, well, this guy, who's in Wyoming that I coached with, back in the day at this level. And we stay in touch and we check on each other, because that kind of support and connection is really key. We don't usually get better all by ourselves. We usually need some help with that.
Yeah.
You think about, okay, well, what would you tell that guy if he called you and he was under stress? I'd tell him to slow down a little bit, take care of himself. I mean, basically, all this advice I would give him, I need to be taking myself.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's probably 5 things that I tell athletes and coaches that they need to pay attention to, and how they're doing in these 5 areas tells me whether they're really capable of taking care of themselves or not. So 8 to 9 hours sleep a night. Well, the average, college student gets 5, and coaches probably get less. 30 minutes of continuous movement a day. So just because you're around the athletes doesn't mean you're working out. But you probably need a 30-minute workout a day, some kind of movement, just to take care of your overall health. A chance to journal or do some counseling and get the inside out where you can look at it. So if I'm talking to you about it and I talk about the stress I'm having it gives me a chance to kind of evaluate how I'm doing, or if I can journal or write it down on a piece of paper, then I can look at what's going on inside of me. The fourth thing would be some prayer or meditation, some time to kind of focus and breathe and remind myself. Probably gratitude is one of the best type of meditations or prayer type activities. And then the fifth thing would be to watch your self-talk. What do you say to yourself every day? Because if you say, I'm an idiot, I'm such an idiot, I'm so stupid, I'm such an idiot, we end up acting that way. It's like predictive.
Yeah.
And it's also can be predictive the other way. If I can say, I'm going to get through this, I can do this. I know I can do this. I'm going to give it my best. I'm going to keep pushing forward. I'm going to find an answer. I'm going to help this guy. I'm going to take care of me in the process. So you watch the self-talk is really, really powerful. And comparison, kills. So doing these 5 things is a chance for me to pull away from comparison and how I stack up against everybody else.
Yeah.
In a profession that's all about performance, comparison, right? Keeping score is a comparison, right? We do that in every sport. Mm-hmm. So pulling back this way, it allows me to connect with self and know who I truly am, live out of the true self of the person that I am. So those are 5 practices. So if I said to you, I think you ought to do these 5 things, and then we talked in a couple of weeks, I would ask you, how you doing? That would tell me kind of how you're doing in terms of self-care. So it makes it pretty practical.
Dr. Adair, lucky to have you over there. So keep putting in the good work, keep fighting a good fight, and we sure appreciate you taking a hike over here to educate our coaches.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Extra Yard. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts under the Inside the Headset feed. You can also find us on the AFCA YouTube page and AFCA.com. If you're in need of more resources, visit jasonfoundation.com. See you next time.